Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We're really pleased to see so many people keen to speak to us and to hear what we're thinking and what we're planning to do. We're going to run through some housekeeping before we start the day. So just to remind everybody, your cameras will be off, you're on mute. We will take questions and there will be an opportunity to engage with us, and hopefully we'll try and make that as interactive as we possibly can. Please, can you keep your questions light and relevant? That would be great, and we will share this post the event. The agenda for today is a few introductions, and then we want to focus on the approach we're taking to our strategy and our forward work plan. We want to lay out some of our thinking, get your feedback into it. There'll be opportunity to ask some questions. We'll tell you about our next steps and when you can expect to see the draft strategy and the consultation period, etc. And then for any final questions and a bit of a mop-up session at the end. So hopefully that should be cover everything. Sorry, words stuck. Speakers today, myself, I'm Sujeeta Hammond, and I am the Senior Strategy Manager here at RECCo in the Strategy and Development team, and John, who you can also see on the screen, John Dixon, is the Director of that team. Okay, aims and objectives for today. It's not just us talking to you about our thinking. We want to be able to share the way that we're developing our strategy and forward work plan, but also to get your feedback, your input, for you to have the opportunity to ask questions. This is very much about our draft strategy at this stage and our draft forward work plan. These are our thoughts about what we're going to take forward. So your input at this point is really valuable, and we hope that we'll be able to get that input from you, but also that you get an understanding of where we are heading with those documents and the development of our approach. So without any further ado, and to kind of get you into the bit about engaging with us, we've got quite a lot of people attending. It'll be really helpful for us to understand where you are, and we're going to launch our first poll. There'll be hopefully a few more of these as we go through and give you the opportunity to input both through our polls and some Q&A. But the first one is about your understanding about us and your knowledge about the RECCo. So if you can submit, that would be great. See, lots of things coming in. Excellent. Quite a lot of you are saying that you are intermediate. Oh, some experts, which is really great. Good to see. And yeah, so most of you think you have some good knowledge of us as an organisation and of the RECC also. And lovely to see that there are some experts on there too. Excellent. Okay, that's really useful. Thank you, and that might help inform some of the activities and actions we take away at the end of this session. So thank you very much for that poll. Right, we're going to begin in earnest now, and I'm going to hand over to John, and we're going to begin the first part of our presentation.
Thanks, Chitra, and thanks to everyone for contributing to that poll. Hopefully some of the RECCo people online were amongst those who declared themselves to be experts, and if there was ever any doubt that these things are a team effort, you just have to look at the photos that we used earlier in that slide to know that these slides weren't put together by the two presenters alone. I certainly wouldn't have chosen that for this slide. Anyway, as Chitra said, this is really to try and gather your feedback. It's not ideal. We appreciate to try and gather feedback on a webinar, which is why we do want to make the best possible use of polls and questions throughout this exercise. So we're being supported by colleagues on the call today who will try and address questions and consolidate them as we go through, and we'll address as many as we can online. But we'd also like to open up the offer of the one-to-one contacts that this webinar is essentially replacing this year, because we're still very early in the development of our forward work plan. It's not going to be published until January, so it's important that we do try and engage with you as much as possible, but we are very conscious that there's lots of time pressures on the industry at the minute. We did offer one-to-ones, and there weren't a lot of people who actually had the time to make use of that, so we thought we'd at least be able to cover the basics of what we're proposing in our strategy and forward work plan today, and then maybe we can have some more targeted conversations on the detail of it. So if you would like to speak to us about any of the projects, pieces of work we're going to talk about today, there'll be contact details at the end. So if I could take you through the next slides, I think I might need to take control. So what we're trying to do, essentially, take this back to basics in terms of why we are separating out the strategy document from the forward work plan, because those of you who are familiar with the Retail Energy Code will know that we have produced a strategy and forward work plan for each of the years that we've been active. That's gone out at the same time every year. We've tried to set out both the kind of high level mission statement, subsequent strategic objectives, our vision and values, etc., and at the same time focusing on the detail of the following 12 months activities that will then inform the budget and give you opportunity to make sure that we've been sufficiently accountable for where we're spending our money, or your money, consumers' money ultimately, whether or not we're prioritizing things appropriately, whether or not there should be something else that we need to be taken into account, giving a high priority, whatever it may be. That is still what we hope to achieve through this exercise over the next few months. But we recognise that actually the industry is moving towards a different phase in its evolution. I suppose for the past 20 odd years, or since privatisation, change has been largely incremental. It's always been about trying to make improvements to the existing market arrangements. That's obviously very different now, where we're moving helter-skelter towards decarbonisation. Some of those investment projects are multi-year. We're obviously all targeting 2030 at the minute in terms of trying to achieve net zero, but then after that there'll be further government-imposed deadlines to achieve certain targets. So we think it's appropriate that we also take a longer-term vision, go beyond that 12-month cycle of a forward work plan, and even go beyond what we've committed to previously in terms of those 3-year forecasts of our costs, and try and think about what we'll be doing for at least the next 5 years. So we've tried to separate this strategy from the forward work plan, and in keeping with other organisations, including Ofgem, their multi-year strategies now looking at the next 5 years. So we'll be looking at that period up to 2030. I think that some of the things we want to capture in this to make sure that we're not too bound by kind of legacy thinking. You know, the RECCo, I'd imagine the same as your organisations, populated people who've got lots of experience of the industry, but with that comes a certain way of thinking about things, and the challenge usually comes from the disruptors, the innovations, the ideas that those who are familiar with the industry may not be having. So it's important that we have a frank and open discussion, not just about how to improve the way things are currently being done, but whether or not we need to challenge the thinking on that more fundamentally. In our exercises with the RECCo board and other stakeholder events, we've used examples such as Kodak, who I was surprised, and Chicha keeps telling me this example, were actually the first to invent digital photographs, but they got it wrong insofar as they thought people would still be printing out on paper, and they were also keen to preserve their existing revenue streams. And so despite the fact they had actually invented the technology, they missed out entirely on that whole new approach to what consumers needed. Another example would be the music industry, who really didn't see streaming of music coming along, missed out entirely for the early days of Napster, etc., and have only more recently been trying to recapture their revenue streams from the actual publication of music. So it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that this isn't just about making incremental improvements to existing technologies, existing business models. We really need to think about it from the other end of the equation and what consumers are demanding, what it is that they want from the industry, etc. And I think that will come to the fore when we start talking about some of the projects that we all know and hear about quite frequently, like demand side response, etc. But a lot of the time, this has been something that's developed by industry that is then dependent upon consumer take-up rather than being pulled by the market, if you like. So it's important that we perhaps challenge our thinking on some of these things. The three areas of core focus I think will be familiar to everybody. It's digitalization. We're obviously trying to embrace all of the additional smart data that we're getting from the heavy investment in the smart meter installation implementation program, digital grids, etc., etc. I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot of push to get meters on walls, but we haven't yet maximized the value that we were able to get from that data that's come from the meters, etc. So that needs to be a big push. We're obviously focusing on decarbonisation, as I touched upon earlier. A lot of this investment is predicated on trying to extract carbon from the energy industry, and I don't think we give ourselves enough credit as a nation, let alone as an industry, that we've now moved entirely away from using coal to generate electricity. I think that's a world first, or at least in the economically developed countries, and we've not made a big enough song and dance of it, to my mind. But similarly, there will be big challenges that as a nation we face, and we all need to kind of work together to try and get there. These are national challenges after all. And finally, decentralization, which touches upon what I was getting to earlier, where the consumer is going to be at the heart of an awful lot of these things, not just about giving consent to access the data that smart meters are generating, but potentially giving access to assets that are actually owned, operated by the consumer themselves. So a lot of energy generation, and particularly flexibility, is going to come from the retail end of the market, which is why we're focusing on it as well, rather than it just being something that we put down to being an upstream issue in terms of where the energy is being generated, etc. Now, all of this makes things very, very difficult. And I guess from our point of view, the great advantage we've got is that we're not like Kodak, we're not like the record labels, in that if we get it wrong, nobody will tell us. We don't have the monopoly on wisdom, but thankfully we've got all of you to advise us on what we need to be putting into our strategy. So the more people we can hear from, challenge our thinking, make sure that they're inputting into where we should be focusing our attentions in terms of future development initiatives, who we need to engage with in terms of new market entrants, etc., the better. So hopefully exercises like this will add to that collective wisdom, and we don't need to have a RECCo branded crystal ball. And funny enough, even these graphics that we've used on this slide, it's challenging in disrupting the industry for publishing graphics and charging for it, in that these are AI generated, so no royalty, no RECCo users money being spent on it. And again, that's something that probably wasn't going to be foreseen 3 years ago, and all those companies that have set up business models selling graphics, etc., they really didn't see this coming. So again, we need to keep challenging ourselves on where the next innovation, the next big challenge is coming from. It won't always be from government-led programs. So with that in mind, what we're trying to do in terms of our longer-term strategy is to, one of the wrong slides, bear with me, is to try and capture the strategic aims, really, if you like. And these are still down from our mission statement that is referred to in the supplier's license currently, but we expect to be enshrined in the code manager license in due course. And at our heart, we are here to deliver on the services that are set out in the REC, not just to operate the code as a code manager, which we do through some in-house activities, but a series of outsourced contracts, as those who are familiar with REC will be aware. But there's a whole bunch of other services that are set out in the Retail Energy Code around theft, around data provision, inquiry services, etc., where we act as the contract management body, if you like. We procure and manage those services. So fundamentally, our day job is to perform the tasks assigned to us by the Retail Energy Code, which is why we have the slightly unimaginative name, I'll take responsibility for that, of the Retail Energy Code company. So fundamentally, that's the day job, that's what we've got to do. But the Retail Energy Code itself was also set up to be a very consumer-centric code, and we certainly don't want to be forgetting that. All of the projects we do are set against a consumer impact assessment, if you like. Why are we doing this? What is the impact on consumers? Is it beneficial to them? So the next of our strategic aims is around protection. Some of these things are in the day job already in terms of protecting consumer data, the things that we control, access to inquiry service data, etc. But more fundamentally, it's about how we evolve our services to make sure that they are delivering the right outcomes for the consumer. And again, this is throughout our DNA as an organisation, not just in what we do, but how things like the performance assurance functions operate. It's all about consumer outcomes rather than a kind of a box ticking function. there is some work to be done on that, as we'll touch upon later, but fundamentally that's what we're all here to achieve, and most of the people who've joined this organization buy into that ethos and that kind of mission driven approach to things. And finally, it's about progressing change, if you like, making sure that we are delivering upon not just our promise to continue to improve services, make sure that interview programs are being delivered, etc. And we have a fundamental role to play in that. So hopefully those 3Ps will kind of capture our strategic aims and form a theme as we go through the rest of this presentation and subsequently the strategy document that we publish. And these should stand the test of time over the next 5 years. So in terms of how that filters down into the actual work we do, I think fundamentally, as I say, they provide a sense check against all of the work we do in terms of the improvements to existing services, etc. But it also sets the parameters for what we shouldn't do. And again, I think there's been some concerns about whether or not there could be scope creep to what we do as an organisation, whether the code itself. And I think to try and put people's minds at rest and give some practical application to how the mission statement will evolve, I think we need to recognise that we do wear two hats. First and foremost, anything we do has to be either set out in the Retail Energy Code or capable of going into it. So again, that reference to what the code is there for, its objectives, is important. If it's not something that would naturally sit in the REC, it's not something that RECCo should be doing. Everything is about the Retail Energy Code and delivering the services requirements set out in it. There's then the secondary aspect of it as to whether or not RECCo as a delivery body should be working on something. And those are two very different questions. Just because something's in the REC doesn't mean we necessarily have to deliver it as a service. It could be about governing third parties or even the parties to the code themselves. So I think as we go through this, you'll hopefully see that we are asking ourselves those fundamental questions through both lenses. Is it something that should be governed under the REC? Is it something that we as an organisation should be doing? And that will hopefully resolve some of the issues that people have of potential scope creep, issues of conflict of interest, etc. So moving on from there, struggling to see this tiny screen with names and pictures down the side. I do apologise. I have to get over my vanity and start wearing glasses. There we are. So in terms of where we are with the process, we want to reassure you that the fact that we're separating out the strategy for the forward work plan is actually going to enhance your ability to engage with us, not diminish it. So although we didn't see the strategy changing from 1 year to the next, it will hopefully stand the test of time. We will continue to consult on that annual forward work plan. We've committed elsewhere to be publishing business plans for each of the projects that are set out, or significant projects that are set out in that forward work plan, etc. So there's no change to those current requirements. The timing of those consultations may change along with the code manager licenses. So that 15th of January date that's currently in the Retail Energy Plan, for instance, might move forward. But we've also committed to publish not just an annual report in terms of how we've been doing and our performance against the code obligations placed on RECCo, etc., but quarterly updates on how we're faring against the milestones of the individual projects, etc. So again, trying to implement changes to increase the levels of transparency on what we do as an organisation and hold ourselves more accountable and more accountable to you as parties through all of these publications. And again, we'll come on to the timetable for these various publications later on in the presentation. So at that point, we have a quick poll just to ask whether or not you're comfortable and agree with those strategic aims. I appreciate it was a brief run through of them, but again, the intent is really to make sure that we're providing that longer term certainty as to the direction of travel rather than focusing on a kind of 12-monthly cycle of pieces of work and not looking beyond the end of our nose. So if you could provide some quick views.
I've just put them back on the screen just to remind everybody where we are, what the strategic aims are.
And if a colleague could just confirm everybody can see the poll. I can't see that screen.
Yep, responses are coming in. Okay, that's just coming through now. Yep, it's very positive. A few of you are unsure, but generally there's a good agreement with that. 90%, that's really useful. You've got a few more minutes to, and also just to pop that in. Great. Okay, that's really useful. That's really helpful to know. And hopefully as we go through, for those of you who are unsure, maybe some of this will become clear as we explain how they will work.
Yeah, as I say, this is still an evolution. So if there's any areas that are not sufficiently clear, or you think we could phrase things better, wherever it may be, we're keen to hear feedback, not just on the big ticket items in terms of whether we've missed a big strategic project or not,
Absolutely.
but whether or not the document which we're producing is sufficiently clear. So please do continue to provide feedback.
Okay, that's great. All right, if we move to the next thing, which is to questions.
Do apologize. That's me taking us too far ahead. It's my fault.
That's okay. There is an opportunity for you to ask questions. You can put your hands up. You'll see that there's another poll that's come up. You can type something in there if that's useful. We'll get a bit of a word cloud to see what your views are. Also, you can raise your hands or put something in the chat function, sorry, in the Q&A function. I'm happy to take any questions on that. If not,
we've not had any questions submitted.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'll move on. John, over to you.
Okay. So breaking down those strategic priorities a bit further, great. If we've got three nice buzzwords, all begin with P, so what? So the next stage of the strategy document will be to try and set out what those mean in terms of specific objectives. And again, we want to make sure that these are things that will stand the test of time. So they're not specific to short-term deliverables. They are themes that should continue over that 5-year period. I don't want to get into too much detail on all of the specific ones, because again, it's an evolving document, and there's things that we can drill into in much more detail in one-to-one conversations and when the document is published, if you like. But to give some examples of how we see this working, and I touched upon it earlier, first and foremost, part of performing our role, which is our commitment to service excellence. So we'll ensure that whatever we're doing, whichever year we're in, there's always improvements being made to the day job. This isn't all about new shiny things coming in and taking on additional work. We're always looking for those incremental improvements, responding to feedback. We've had some very good feedback over the past few weeks through the RECCo on the road events, specifically comment on improvements that have been made to the REC portal, etc., speeding up the change process, all of those things. So it's important we continue to do those relatively quick, short-term projects that improve your experiences as a REC party, a REC user, as much as anything else. So things like that would be captured as service excellence. What we're trying to do with these objectives and introducing them to you today is to make sure that we are capturing meaningful deliverables as part and parcel of this. So again, it's not all about us just listing off all of the different projects that we're getting involved in that have been initiated by government or Ofgem or REC parties through the change process, but to make sure we're responding to the needs of the market in its broadest sense, not just the REC parties, but third parties, consumer groups, potential disruptors, etc., etc. So it's important that our deliverables are meaningful as well. But again, as a strategy document, we want to make sure that there's a distinction here from what will go in the forward work plan. So these should continue to be things that we will deliver over a course of time rather than time bound to a specific date, etc. Hopefully these outcomes on the right are meaningful and things that we can still be held to account for if we haven't delivered them. But again, I appreciate that some of these might lend themselves to projects, and what we don't want to do is kind of blur the boundaries again between what should go in this strategic document and what should more appropriately go in that forward work plan. We'll come on to the forward work plan in the latter half of this webinar, but again, focusing on the kind of higher level outcomes of that longer term. We'd appreciate your feedback on the outcomes that we've set out on this on this slide, and similarly for the next two, and whether or not they are meaningful. Hopefully not just word salad, but something that you can genuinely hold us to account for. You said in your strategy document you were going to do X. Here we are 2, 3, 4, 5 years later and you haven't done it. Why not? So again, opportunity to provide feedback to a question online in a moment, if a colleague can text through that.
So there'll be a format where you get a yes no type question and something that you can add words to. So yeah, the next poll please, Laura, when you're ready.
Oh, sorry, just bring it up now as quick IT.
Thank you.
There we go.
So it'd be really good to get some feedback on those outcomes, as John said. What are you looking for us to achieve? What are you expecting to see? Is there anything there that's not there that you think should be? Be really good to get your input into those. Would it help if I popped those back on the screen? It'd be useful for you to see those in the background. Or if you have some views, you'd like somebody would like some certainty. You're also welcome to put any questions in the chat. Clarity. Okay. Hopefully, any more comments at this stage? Some clear guidelines, systems and technology. Okay, we'll pick up some of this. We'll get a fuller reading of your comments. This is just to give us a snapshot of what you're thinking. So anything else, as I say, also feel free to raise your hands. We can also just chat.
I think I'm right in saying these polls are live throughout the course of the webinar, aren't they? So they can be added to as we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, John,
well,
should we move on?
Yeah, let's move on. Well, the next is an opportunity to go beyond just a snapshot poll and ask if there's any questions on that section so far.
Good.
See anything in
No
chat?
Questions?
If
Nothing.
not, we can
We've
move
not
on.
had anything
Pick
come in the
anything
chat.
at the end. Okay. Again, it's always a difficult balance between trying to leave plenty of opportunity for comments throughout and actually recognizing that we might answer some of them through the next slides. But if anybody does have any questions that you want us to answer before the end of the presentation, just add them to the chat as we go. Okay, so the next is very similar setup. We've gone through perform. The next would be protect. As I touched upon, this is a combination of what we're trying to achieve through our longer term pieces of work and initiatives and make sure we're delivering positive consumer outcomes. But then there's obviously the protection elements of the day job. So within that, it's about making sure that our systems are secure, that we are granting the appropriate levels of access to the data that we control. We are committed to fulfilling the open data principles that are now enshrined within network licenses, for instance, and we've been applying that to RECCo controlled data for a period of time. Some of the data items, for instance, will be assumed to be open or presumed open, I think is the right phrase. So the things that are not sensitive, then they're not relating to specific personal details, etc. We will facilitate that being published in a much easier to access format than has traditionally been the case. We recognise, however, that there are some data items that we absolutely need to safeguard and make sure they're only being provided where there's either a particular case to do so. So, for instance, priority services registered data, etc., now has a different presumption as to what can be shared and what can't. But there will be some things that need the explicit consent of the consumer to be able to share. That ties in with one of the longer term projects that's been facilitated by Ofgem, around consumer consent, but the issue of consumer consent is much more ubiquitous than that. Any data that relates specifically to the consumer needs the appropriate safeguards around it. It's not just those that have been highlighted in the existing consumer consent project and for the purposes of flexibility that they're focusing on. Touched upon performance priority services register stuff earlier on. The work on the share want support register, for instance, might change who that needs to be shared with going forward. So it's not just something that's based with the existing energy industry participants, as has been the case in the past. There's definitely a move to be able to share that data with telecoms, with also with other utilities, etc., and potentially with other sectors. So it could be with Department of Work Pensions, could be with NHHS, etc. So the even existing data, I think, is going to go through a transformation in terms of the levels of access that will be required to it. Performance assurance is very much in that space, in that we need to make sure that we are not just adhering to our own rules within the RECCo ourselves, and we do hold ourselves accountable via the Performance Assurance Board for everything RECCo is doing as well. It's not just our service providers and REC parties, but more than that, it's about trying to make sure that all the arrangements, the processes set out within the REC are delivering the outcomes that's intended. And again, this is all about making sure the consumer is getting the right levels of service, etc., intended by those arrangements. And if they're not, it shouldn't just be a case of pointing their finger and saying, you know, party X is not performing as well as party Y. The aim of performance assurance is to identify the underlying root causes of those disparities, why certain processes themselves might not be working, rather than it just being about individual performance against them, and trying to push for solutions. In our forthcoming forward work plan, we'll talk more about that and the work that's been done more recently to cleanse data and to try and facilitate resolution of issues rather than it just being a reporting function. But I think we recognise that there's a need to demonstrate the value of these type of activities and make sure that we are providing the right kind of narrative as to why the burden of reporting for performance assurance purposes results in positive outcomes and actual value for money. And ultimately, it's all about mitigating consumer harms. I think there's some very short-term issues like that, as I say, where things are going wrong. But we've also been involved in pieces of work to try and reconcile payment methods, tariffs, etc. So again, part of our work is to try and make sure that we are facilitating better outcomes for consumers, either as a whole or particular archetypes of consumer within that, and prevent any kind of disadvantages they're having. So the things that we do on, as I say, prepayment meter levelization, etc., to my mind would come under that protect theme. So again, if there's any questions on the outcomes that you'd like to see on that, there's only so much you can fit on a page, particularly on a PowerPoint slide, obviously. So we're happy to gather any and all examples of outcomes you would like to see and try and distill those down into our strategy document and future commitments. So again, open to a poll and then any further questions.
So the poll should be open for you now. Any thoughts, anything you'd like to see, focusing on those outcomes particularly? As John said, this is our starting point. Your input would be really useful. Anything we've missed, anything you would have expected to see that's not there? It looks like no responses, so I'm assuming that you're looking at those outcomes and pretty happy with them. John, do you want to go?
Yeah.
I'll go back one just so that people can see them again. There we go. Okay, that's fine.
Again, you've got time to respond to this throughout the webinar. So if you'd like further time to think about it, you can add to this later. As I say, it's useful for us to capture this, and again, if there's a desire to have a fuller conversation to drill down into any of these, we'll provide the contact details for that at the end of this webinar. Okay. Do we have any questions so far? If not, we can move straight on to the progress item. Nothing so far?
Nothing.
Okay. I always get that moment of doubt whether or not the technology is actually working. If I could be in a room talking to ourselves, but we do actually still have people online.
I'm assured there are people on the call.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and in terms of progress, as was touched
Look,
on
we've
earlier,
got a thumbs up. Somebody's
you have a
definitely
thumbs up. Perfect. Feels like being in a seance sometimes. Is there anybody there? Going back to our mission statement, fundamentally, this is about not just facilitating the existing market by providing the governance of it, but by trying to facilitate innovation, etc. This sometimes gets seen as being about new products, new shiny bits of software. It's not necessarily about that. It's about new ways of working as much as anything else, new thinking. So we are committed to being innovative in all we do, testing our assumptions.
Sorry to interrupt you, John. What slide did you want to be on?
Oh, this. Oh, sorry. I'm not in sync, am I? Yeah, it's progress. That's the right one.
There we go.
Yeah. So, so again, I don't think this is about us trying to promote any particular business model or outcome. We should certainly always be technology agnostic, software agnostic, all of these things. It's about trying to make sure that the market as a whole can trial new ideas, bring new things to new services and products to consumers, etc. And where we identify inhibitors within the retail energy code, potential blockers to doing that, we should address those. So, for instance, we've got sandbox procedures within the retail energy code. We could provide disapplications of rules for innovative products, etc., derogations. So again, we're trying to be flexible not only in our delivery of products and what we do, but making sure the governance arrangements themselves are not a barrier to innovative thinking, etc. Part and parcel of that, obviously, is program delivery. Just skipping ahead to that, obviously, we want to make sure that where there is a clear role for the retail energy code to help facilitate programs of work. So a good example of that would be the market-wide half-hourly settlement program, which has had consequential changes on the retail energy code and how we qualify market participants, etc. We'll certainly have a role in that. So again, we will capture those kind of engagement in external programs and pieces of work under this progress banner, making sure that we are helping facilitators moving things along. And part and parcel of that will be this horizon scanning rule. As I said earlier, we shouldn't always be reacting to what policymakers, whether it be government, Ofgem, are pushing. We should be thinking about where consumer trends are going, what the pull from the market will be, not just the push from policymakers or the upstream system changes, etc. should be. I think the retail space is going to become increasingly dynamic, and it will look very, very different 5 years from now than what it looked like 5 years ago. And it's important we understand what those new requirements will be, what we can help facilitate, what we need to prudently wait for, etc., and try and get that balance right between preparing for things and helping facilitate moves to new business models, whether it be time use tariffs, energy as a service, those kind of things, and at the same time avoiding any kind of nugatory effort and potentially wasting money on the wrong outcome, if you like. So again, it's important that we engage with as many stakeholders as possible on this, making sure we are cited on future market requirements and can plan accordingly. And again, we need the participation of the widest range of stakeholders possible on that, including all of you on this call. So again, would you agree with those as being the appropriate outcomes of this strategic theme? I'd welcome all responses now. If we can move on to that, please.
Should have the poll now back on your screens. I saw a thumbs up. That's great. Okay. All right, no worries. Again, as John said, you can come back to this if you have some thoughts as we go through. That kind of brings us to the end of our kind of overview of the strategy and where we're going. What we'd like to do now is to go into those in a bit more detail in terms of what does it mean going forward into the board work plan. So I think we're right on time, John, in terms of our timing. So I haven't seen any more questions come up, and there doesn't appear to be anything further in the responses. So hold on, two might have come in. Somebody might have said something. Okay, so yeah, management and delivery, risk management, innovation. Okay, so we've got some things coming in terms of what you would like to see from this priority. That's useful. Again, as I say, we might be able to pick up with anybody who wants to discuss these in more detail, but we'll be able to download your full comments and review those. So thank you very much for those.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, we've had one question come in.
Oh.
Okay. Is it in the chat, Jenny? Or is it the Q&A?
It should be in the...
Yeah, I can see it. So under program delivery, would RECC get involved in any of the delivery of the supplier aspects of smart metering?
Yes, I believe we would, is the short answer. I guess the more difficult part of that is trying to define exactly what that role would be. But I think it's, as I was touching on earlier, I personally feel there's a where as an industry we're lacking in terms of the amount of communication we're providing to consumers on what all the benefits of this investment in flexibility and smart meters, etc., will be, whether or not time of use tariffs will be appropriate for them given their consumption patterns, etc. So I do think there may be a role for us in trying to facilitate some of the messaging around that, make sure there's some resources, a consistent version of the truth, if you like. Again, we're here to provide services to the market. So if there is a gap, a requirement that you as RECC parties or stakeholders feel we could appropriately fulfill, then do let us know. But I would tend to agree that there is work to be done there in terms of trying to improve the existing offering, and even in terms of things like the problems we've had recently with the numbers of IHD in home displays that aren't working, or the communications element of smart meters, etc. I know that one of the responses Department of Energy Security and Net Zero have put out is to have a smart meter code to try and resolve those issues. Well, we've only recently consolidated various different codes of practice, etc. So if there was a requirement to focus not just on the day of installation, as the current smart meter installation code of practice does, but the subsequent follow-up visits to fix any issues, provide further communication, etc. If those practices need to be set out in governance, that it wouldn't, to my mind, make sense to have yet another code of practice that sits out of the existing RECC ecosystem. It'd be more appropriate, to my mind, to integrate that with the existing RECC setup and make sure that it's part and parcel of our existing codes of practice and consumer protections, etc. So yeah, I definitely think there's a role for us there. The specifics of it, I think, is very much down to parties in terms of what that space is, because what we don't want to be doing is intervening in things that suppliers feel is more their role, because it's part of the consumer contact, part of your USP, etc. So yeah, it's about getting that balance right between the things that's appropriately done by a central governance body versus as part and parcel of your relationship with the consumer.
Thanks, John.
Did that answer the question, or was there something specific it related to?
I don't know if Rachel might have a follow-up. We can come back to that, and also happy to have, as John says, a conversation with you in terms of anything that you think that we should be focusing or have identified for us to look at. So thank you for that question. Okay.
Yeah, we can always come back to it. So in terms of the forward work plan, as we say, we're sharing our early thinking today to try and get some feedback on it. So there's opportunity for you to shape what will go in the forward work plan for 2025 through 26. We are still aiming to publish by the 15th of January. We're not moving that date. Let's say the code manager license might change the publication cadence and timings, etc. But for this kind of remaining year as a non-licensee, I think about our remaining year, we're sticking with that publication date. So we've got a couple of months to refine what goes in the plan, and we're really, again, looking for your feedback today. I guess the main thing is to make sure we're not missing anything obvious that we need to be including, making sure we've got adequate resource, including budget and people for. But equally, if there's things in there that you don't feel are appropriate for RECC to be taken forward, or we shouldn't be giving them priority over something else, again, that's very useful feedback, because this isn't just about making sure we've recognized everything that needs to be done, but making sure we're prioritizing things appropriately. We recognize where there are potentially conditions on doing things, and some of those conditions might be based on external dependencies, like an Ofgem or a DESNZ decision, etc. So again, making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what is appropriate for us to plan for, even as a prudent operator, even if it's not yet certain that we will be taking those things forward. And I raised that early because that's going to be quite a theme for 25-26, as I'll come on to. So moving forward from there, we've adopted the now next later approach. We set this out last year as well. Many people will be familiar with this as kind of a three horizons approach to work. What we've tried to do here is recognise that there are certain things that need to be undertaken over the next 5-year period, and that we touched upon earlier in the strategy document. There are things we absolutely must be working on over the next 12 months. And that will include some things that we're not yet certain about. So the two kind of boundary riders, if you like, are the CRS transfer, which is subject to an imminent decision for Ofgem, and a strategic direction statement that we know will be consulted upon and then finalised by Ofgem over this coming winter. The expectation will be that we deliver the obligations set out in that strategic direction statement, but we've not yet had sight of it. So we know there are going to be things that we have to do over the next 12 months that we haven't yet seen and not yet certain of. And there are others where it's prudent for us to plan for, even if that the answer from Ofgem may be it's not actually required. So as I say, bear in mind with that, at this stage, there's a degree of uncertainty around some of these projects. And hopefully over the coming months, before we publish the forward work plan in January, we'll be able to resolve some of those uncertainties. But by and large, we'll ask a question in terms of whether we've captured the right kind of high-level projects, initiatives, work streams in that 3-year horizon. Is there three horizon approach? Is there anything that you would have expected to see there that's missing? And it's a poor question. That's slightly different than what I asked, but yeah, I am particularly keen on whether or not there's anything we are missing.
No, there's a couple of unsures, but the majority of people are coming in and saying yes, that helps. That's good to know.
Okay. That's good that there's none in the know. The unsures, again, that's very useful, because that's where we can elaborate. Sometimes we refer to people with one piece of terminology, and in fact other people are using something else. So sometimes there's those kind of issues. But again, if there's any areas where you feel we need to provide a bit more clarity in order for you to have that certainty, do let us know.
Yeah. And it will be more fully explained when it goes into the forward work plan, but we just want to understand whether this approach does help you understand what that future plan looks like, what's likely to be in it, and gives you that forward look at least, rather than just focusing on the year ahead. Okay, that's positive. Thank you very much for those of you who have been able to respond to that.
And now I think we can drill down a little bit more into some of those. So I'll skip on to the focus in the coming year. So as I touched upon earlier, there are 5 big areas of work that have quite a degree of uncertainty around them at the moment. So we want to be as transparent as we could about what they are, what we're waiting for, whether or not we feel they'll be resolved by the time we publish the forward work plan, or whether or not we need to publish on the basis of some caveats in there and future events. We'll start with the potential transfer of the central registration systems, which has been consulted upon by Ofgem. The nub of that, and I'll touch upon this a bit later, is whether or not responsibility for the provision of the CRS should move wholly from the smart meter communications license, the DCC, to the retail energy code, and be delivered wholly through RECCo. A decision on that consultation, we understand, is imminent, So by the time we publish, that should be resolved one way or another. But there are others that may take a bit longer to resolve. Again, one of those being consumer consent, which Ofgem has consulted on, provided a particular role, or being minded to provide a particular role to RECCo. And again, we're waiting on a decision as to whether or not that will be taken forward. I'll touch upon each of these projects a little bit further individually, but I just wanted, as I say, to set out some of the uncertainties around it. Similarly, with the Smart Secure Electricity System, which is still the name of the project, despite the fact it also covers gas tariffs, the Retail Energy Code has been identified as the appropriate governance body to place obligations on suppliers to provide tariff information, and kind of coterminous with that would be for RECCo to ensure that the data is of sufficient quality and it's been made, the access to it has been made available to the parties who have the right access permissions, etc., etc. Code reform I've already touched upon. We're anticipating that the impacts on the Retail Energy Code would be relatively limited, insofar as there's no further consolidation expected of the code with another code. We're also expecting that the Retail Energy Code company and Alexon, in relation to BSE, will be amongst the first phase of code manager licensees. Ofgem has indicated that will be in the first half of 2026. So for planning assumptions, we're trying to get everything ready for the 1st of April 2026, but that date is itself subject to the progression of the secondary legislation to set out what needs to go in that license, etc. So Ofgem itself, it has those external dependencies as well in terms of the pace of work that we can expect from our parliamentarians. And the market-wide half-hourly settlement programme, most of you will be aware, is currently undergoing a potential refocusing of certain milestones within the planning, not to be referred to as a delay, but the proposals around that are currently with Ofgem. Again, we should see a decision on that, as far as I understand, before Christmas. So we should know whether or not the REC deliverables that are part and parcel of that MHHS programme are to be kind of first half of 2025, 26, or a little bit later. I think that the shift is somewhere between the kind of spring of next year and the autumn, as I understand it. I'll come on to those in a little bit more detail later on, but if we can drill down to some of those particular programs. And as I touched upon earlier, we shouldn't ever forget kind of continuous improvements to the existing services, just because new programs sometimes get more attention and are on kind of more people's radar. It's important that we always stick to this commitment to improve what's already there. We've made some of those changes recently and had feedback from them, as I touched upon, through the roadshows that have been provided. But we will set out more of that in terms of what will be undertaken through 25, 26. So again, this will be an important feature of our forward work plan for next year. And the code manager evolution in particular is an important piece as far as the existing contracts for the provision of code manager services. They're coming up for renewal, so there'll be a piece of work to see whether or not we need to reshape the nature of those services that we're looking to procure, which ones should be extended, which ones need to be taken back out to market. There's information on that on the REC portal, with the initial focus being on digital services, etc. So there's certain things that is in the public domain, and you can see what our intentions are. There's obviously some things that will be subject to commercial sensitivities to not prejudice the procurement. So a bit of a balance on what we can share and what we can't. But in terms of the refocusing of our intentions and what will be rebundled, etc., there's clarity around that. So I think that's all I was going to say on service delivery. If I move quickly on to the next under perform, which is around our systems. Again, touching upon the biggest impact we have from MHHS, which is in terms of the changes to systems and ways of working, particularly around the electricity inquiry services. So again, we will have ongoing deliverables on that to an extent, some of them being shifted from 24, 25 into 25, 26. Touched upon the CRS transfer earlier on, which is subject to an Ofgem decision. But the important point we'd like to make is that we will and are looking at improvements we could potentially make to switching arrangements irrespective of that decision. And we've been quite open working with the DCC to identify where improvements should be made, irrespective of who continues to be accountable for those future improvements. And I think there's some good examples of that have been discussed through the Performance Assurance Board, like improvements to address management quality, etc. The resolving some of the problems we had with the communications and the roles and responsibilities as a result of that major switching incident last year, etc. All of those kind of things, but more generally just improving the switching service as a whole. One of the things we have touched upon elsewhere, and I think Ofgem alluded to in its consultation document, is who performs the role of a design authority for those switching arrangements. And Ofgem itself said there'd be some benefits in moving that role more explicitly to within the RECC. We have an existing design authority role in relation to the Retail Energy Code itself. But again, if we could apply that to switching arrangements, we'd be able to take a much longer term view as to what the direction of travel is for those, whether or not we need to continue to embrace that potential next step towards next day switching that Ofgem originally had in mind, or whether or not actually that requirement has been superseded by changes in the market, changing customer needs and expectations, and the focus should be on something else. So again, I think that's all part and parcel of what we need to engage with stakeholders on, undertake some research on, make sure we're building towards the right horizon, if you like, not just something that was part and parcel of expectations 5-6 years ago when the switching arrangements were being worked on by Ofgem. There's the next. There's a license fulfillment. I think some of this is relatively straightforward in that we know that the license will place obligations upon us. We believe that most of them will be in keeping with existing RECCo ways of working. Most of the requirements around the code manager role were actually known at the time the Retail Energy Code was being developed. So in a way, we've been a little bit of a guinea pig for that code manager function versus the traditional code administrator function, taking much more of a proactive role, etc., being to a greater degree autonomous of the decisions of change panels, etc. But in terms of the change management of the RECC, that it's clear that will have to change in line with the Ofgem thinking. So the replacement of the existing change panel with input from a stakeholder advisory forum, etc. But other than that, we're relatively comfortable, well prepared in terms of the expectations for our levels of transparency, the reporting requirements that Ofgem might place upon us as a future licensee, etc. The bit that I touched upon earlier that is currently uncertain, will have a direct impact on our forward planning each and every time it's published, will be this strategic direction statement. Now, as things stand, we're not expecting to see sight of the first one of those until this winter, when it'll be consulted upon, and then it'll probably be finalised in the spring. One of the things we have asked Ofgem for is to ensure that in future years that consultation and publication could come forward to make sure that it's part and parcel of our budget setting, because at the minute there's a risk that there may be something in that SDS that we haven't anticipated in our forward work plan or budget setting. So we need to try and mitigate that concern. That said, I'm hoping that this first statement will essentially just follow what we've previously seen from government in the strategic policy statements that government puts out, and the work of NESO, both of which feed into Ofgem's thinking. So hopefully there'll be no surprises, but obviously until we see that SDS published, it's something that we need to track. I think that's all I was going to say on Perform. I think we have another poll and then opportunity for questions.
And we have got a question in the chat, so we can come to that. But yeah, if we're going to ask this question after each of the drill downs into the forward work plan. So anything that you think that should be focused on that's not there, whether you agree with what's there, that would be really useful. We see that coming through now. And for that to come through. A little bit of time to come through on my screen. Don't know if that's come through on yours, John. I
can't see the poll results now.
No. Or I don't know if you've got them. They're coming up for you.
Yeah, I can see them. So 100% agree.
Oh, marvellous.
Okay.
There is one question in the chat.
I'm half tempted to quit while I'm ahead, but
well, if there's any more to come in, that we can come back to that. But there is a question. It's on SSES. I know we're going to cover that a bit later on, but the question is, under SSES, will RECCo also be placing obligations on flex providers if they are licensed by Ofgem in the same way as suppliers? I'm not sure if that's clear for us yet, but you might have a view on that.
No, I think that's a fair summary, in the sense that's a question for government, really, in terms of whether or not the new load controller licensees will be obligated to become party to the RECCo. I've certainly made the case that they should, because when the RECCo was introduced, there was an explicit requirement from Ofgem that all relevant licensees become party to it, so that it wouldn't just be a supplier code or etc. So all of the gas transporters, all of the electricity network operators were obligated to sign, and we subsequently extended that into metering agents as well for the first time. So I think the same logic should apply to the load controllers, to the extent that they are the parties who will be getting access to the tariff information, which will be governed under the RECCo. I think it makes sense for both ends of that data transaction to be governed in the same place. So to the extent that load controllers is going to be licensees, I think it would make sense for them to be RECCo parties, fully represented in our governance. They are already able to make change proposals, etc. But it's important that they're franchised through the same stakeholder advisory forum, etc., as everybody else. So my view would be, yes, they will be, but say that's a decision for the government to take. And I think there'll be a way forward document on that fairly soon.
Thanks, John.
Oh, that covers your question, Rachel. But again, happy to pick up any further details on it afterwards if that's unclear.
Okay, John, we've got about 25 minutes to cover the last few slides, so we may need to canter on.
And then I'll get the old shepherd's crook around the neck. So jumping ahead to protect. So as I touched upon earlier, first and foremost, we need to protect the data that we are in control of. Not all of that can be suitably shared through open data principles. Some of it is already subject to consumer consent. There are already requirements that have been for a number of years around consumer consent, the Smart Energy Code for access to half-hourly data, etc. There are already consumer consent provisions on other data items, but the focus of Ofgem's recent consultation on consumer consent is very much about releasing half-hourly half-hourly consumption data to enable the provision of flexibility services. So very much in keeping with the direction of travel of the Smart Secure Electricity System Programme, very much the next step of MHHS, if you think about it that way as well. And I think to the extent that there's going to be lots of different demands on consumer data to fulfill lots of different use cases, it won't all be about flexibility. It won't always be about electricity. Sometimes it'll be about gas. It could be about priority services register or the future share want support register. It's important that those consents and the mechanism for capturing that consent from the consumer and giving them retention of control as to whether or not they want to take back their consent, change it, vary it, wherever it may be, is done in one place. I think if we have lots and lots of different portals for this, we're going to lose the consumer. They're going to be disengaged. And I think fundamentally, we need to make sure they are engaged and trust in what's been provided, and that they're suitably retaining control, as I say. So I think the expectation of Ofgem is very much that there be a single mechanism to capture consumer consents, and we'd see that working with lots of different use cases and requirements across the piece. So we're very keen to ensure that this is being developed as part and parcel of this overall data sharing infrastructure. We've had discussions with Alexon to tie in with their role as the flexibility market facilitator. We've been speaking to NISO, certainly speak to Ofgem and DESNED on an ongoing basis. So it's important that these different requirements are all compatible and fit together, properly integrated. So yeah, that's the focus of consumer consent work. If I can move on quickly from there, so I'm more than happy to pick up any questions further down the line if need be. I wanted to touch on briefly on other areas mitigating consumer harms. I touched upon this earlier on in terms of providing prepayment meter levelization, etc. That followed immediately on the heels of the market stabilization charge, which I understand has now been the final reconciliation of that has been completed and invoices sent out. So that MSE should be coming to an end. The provision of the levelization of standing charges, to our knowledge, will continue. Ofgem has indicated that it's no longer minded to pursue the levelization of debt, the volumetric aspect of debt. So that levelization 2.0, as we sometimes refer to it as, is being paused. And I think that was an expectation that there may be some further announcements from the government or further work on more targeted support for energy consumers. I've not yet seen anything from either Ofgem or the government on that, but again, this is an area where we're already providing services, reconciliation services, utilising existing industry data. So it may be something that we get involved in again going forward. I've included the theft reduction strategies part and parcel of Protect, and that's on the basis that this is fundamentally about trying to mitigate the risks to health and safety that are inherent with meter tampering, meter bypasses, etc. So the key component of that will always be our Stay Energy Safe campaign and trying to dissuade and deter consumers for ever thinking about interfering with their meters, etc., and exposing themselves and their families to harm. But there will be other things that we take forward. There'll be continuation of the data and insights program, trying to make better use of smart meter reads, tamper alerts, etc., to see whether or not we can pull all of that information together to indicate where there might be theft occurring and whether or not that can become a lead generation service, if you like, to eventually replace what used to be the theft risk assessment service, so something else that can augment what suppliers are already doing to identify potential theft on their portfolio. We've been doing a lot of work on incentives, not just changing the existing theft detection incentive scheme. So some of the changes that will come into effect 1st of April next year, subject to the change going through, will be to change the nature of that incentive so it rewards the activity rather than just the outcome, some of which is, you may have a supplier who's followed best practice throughout but just can't pass the evidential threshold of a confirmed theft and therefore wouldn't be in line for a receipt of a payment under the TDIS scheme as is. We don't think that was creating the right incentive, so we want to reward the good behaviours, if you like, the right activities, rather than the happenstance of what's found and proven. So I think that will be a big change. But we're also looking at other changes in and around the incentive space, like whether or not there could be a replacement for the reasonable endeavours scheme, which essentially allows for extraordinary claims for investigations of complex sites or potentially multi-premise investigations, etc., which the theft detection incentive scheme just it doesn't cater for. That's very much for the kind of individual investigations. So there may be something further we can do there. There are other proposals that are going through the theft investigation group around whether or not there could be a centrally procured revenue protection service, etc., etc. So a lot going on in the space of theft. Similarly with codes of practice, I refer to that in the plural because this isn't just about the third-party intermediaries. We've got the proposal currently going through the change process to mandate that non-domestic suppliers should only use a RECCo accredited TPI. We are continuing to progress that change proposal, notwithstanding the government has issued consultation on whether or not they should regulate those TPIs. going forward, there may be a need to look at other codes of practice. So we've seen in the trade press calls for better governance of heat pump installers and other types of intermediary. And I think any areas like that, I think it very much fits within our strategic scope to consider whether or not that's something that should be provided through the Retail Energy Code. So again, I think that's all I was going to touch upon in terms of Protect. I'm more than happy to try and answer any questions. Again, if there's any areas that we are missing, please do let us know.
Currently no questions, John, but we do have another poll on whether you agree with this in terms of the focus areas under this priority. If you could let us know what you think, that would be really useful. So that's been launched in the chat for you now. Hopefully I'm going to see if I can actually see the poll this time and see if that comes through. No, seems to be a technical error on my end. Got a couple of responses coming in. We've got about 8, 9, 10 people coming in at 9. So hopefully, Laura, you might have to come up and let me know what that's looking like.
100%. Oh, no, we've just had a quick change. So 90% of people agree with our focus, and then we've got somebody who's unsure.
Okay. And if there's anything that you think actually we think there's something really obvious that you're missing or should be thinking about, please do let us know. We'd be grateful to hear your views. Okay, and I can't see any questions coming in, John, so.
Okay, so I shall move ahead, conscious of time. So we talked about program delivery earlier on. I think most people will be familiar with market-wide half-family settlement. Again, the purpose of this session was not to go into any of these pieces of work in great detail, but if there's anything you do need some further information on, we can just let us know and we can point you in the direction of that. But in terms of the RECCo activities around this, is primarily to make sure that our systems are ready, that our qualification processes that we apply to parties are ready to literally just bring everything up to speed with the requirements of MHHS. I say, I don't think the scope of those activities will change, but they may move back later into 25, 26 as a result of the proposed replan. So again, I wasn't proposing to go into great detail on that today, but more than happy to try and answer any questions if there are any. And then the next that I wanted to talk about, and again, I've talked about this already, so I do jump ahead a little bit, around facilitating innovation. The obvious example of this being about ensuring there is flexibility, there's demand side response, and the obvious role for this has been indicated by government as part of the SSES program, which is to make sure we facilitate the publication of tariff data by suppliers, all of whom are party to the RECCo and obligated to adhere to it. So again, I think that ties in very neatly with the parallel work being undertaken by Ofgem around consumer consent, etc. As touched upon earlier, I don't know whether we'll be given an explicit role with respect to load control licensees, etc. I think that's very much part and parcel of what government's currently thinking through. It's more than possible. So, as I say, I think we try to limit the current planning assumptions to those things that have been indicated to be relevant to the RECCo through the published consultation documents. There was no explicit reference in the other two consultations on load control licenses or around the standardization of energy smart assets. But again, we'll wait and see what government is minded to take forward. I think that's all I was going to say around progress. So we've touched upon some of the other programs, etc., which could suitably have come under that section. But if there's any other questions.
No questions, John. Poll has been launched. Hopefully people can let us know. I still am having technical difficulties to see that, so it may be something, Laura, in a minute that I'll ask you to let us know where we are. Nope, can't access that. I'm sure that's user error rather than, but we are where we are. I can't see that. So Laura, let me know when you've had a few more in what that's looking like.
Yeah, so we've had 100% so far agree.
Okay, that's really useful. As I say, no more questions in the chat on this at the moment, John.
Okay. In that case, I'll move forward on that. We've had that. So in terms of the next steps and timeline, as touched upon earlier, nothing we're doing in terms of the publication of the strategy documents. Hopefully this side of Christmas takes away from your opportunity to engage further in the forward work plan. We're not changing any of the current processes of consulting both on the forward work plan and on the budget. What we will do this year, though, is ask some specific questions in relation to the forward work plan to respond to, because last year, I think the year before, we simply published the document and invited comment on it. And I think this year we'll take some of the lessons of trying to make it easier for parties to respond by asking some very specific consultation questions upon it. Some of them might be very, very high level. Some of them might be drilling down into the detail. So again, the timing of that won't change, but the approach to trying to gather feedback may. Other than that, I think the timetable is pretty much as it has been in previous years. So again, happy to answer any questions on the timetable if there are any. Otherwise, I'll move forward.
Sorry, just before we move on to, on the timetable, just wanted to flag, there will be further webinars once the draft has been published, and there'll be communication about that in due course. So do look out for those webinar notifications, and make sure you can get signed on to those. So there'll be those coming up in January. But again, just look out for some comms in terms of the publication. And again, as John has said, there is some time still to speak to us directly. So we're offering again the one-to-ones if you want to reach out to us. I can't see any questions coming in. And we're taking that as either that was really clear and people are really happy with that, or they need to go away and ponder on what we've said.
Well, either way, it's open. So I think we could give you some time back then for whatever you've got scheduled for noon. We will circulate these slides. Don't worry about trying to capture these contact details, etc. We'll ping them around. But again, if you do have any further questions, you can always email them to us at any point. And the two email addresses we've got there, if there's anything specific to the strategy document or the forward work plan that we've covered today, if you could please send them through to recco_strategy@retailenergycode.co.uk. If you've got any more general questions that are not to do with the forward work plan or strategy, please send it through to info@retailenergycode.co.uk. And there's a wider pool of people who will have access to that email account and can respond to your email more quickly. Is there any further comments or questions? Sorry, Studra.
I was just going to say, we'd love your feedback on the approach we've taken today. So please do fill in that little poll that's just been issued now. But also we're hoping in the future, and it might be just if we use a moment or two just to say, in future we'd be quite keen to see if we could hold a workshop whereby we've got some people, thank you for your cheers by the way, we'd get some people in a room. We could do a hybrid whereby we do a delivery of what we're thinking, and we use another part of the session for those people who can attend in person to do deep dives on the issues that we're going to take forward. So it would be really helpful to know if that would be something that you'd be interested in us doing in the following year. So building on our engagement with you, we'd like to be able to, keep understanding what you need from us and what would help, and what would make it more interactive for you to be able to do that. If you were interested in that kind of approach, that would be great. Some thumbs up would be interesting to know if that is something that you're interested in. Useful to know. Excellent. Brilliant. So that is something that we can take away next year and think about a hybrid approach whereby we do some, as we say, some dissemination of what we're thinking, and then some workshops to do some deep dives. That'd be really useful. Thank you. That's all from me, John. I don't have anything else, and we don't have any questions coming.
No further questions, nothing in the chat. In which case, I'll give you all 9 minutes back to make a cup of tea before your 12 o'clocks. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.